pretty good article written by friend of the show, Dustin Baker.
Yeah, so we like this a lot. Dustin, keep writing stuff so that we can keep crediting you with whole segments of our podcast so that we can talk about your articles.
Well, and they give us great stuff to talk about. So obviously we're big fans of Vikings Territory. So if you haven't checked them out yet, head over to vikingsterritory.com. That's not a sponsor. That's just something you should do, because if you're a Vikings fan, it's good stuff. It's good content. And we read that stuff regularly. That's just kind of part of our daily and weekly intake of Vikings information. And it's turned out to be really good fodder for conversation on the show.
Absolutely.
So all that to say, we've got this article entitled 3 Worst Parts of the Vikings Roster Currently, or kind of moving into this next season.
Yeah.
And so Dustin has outlined 3 different position groups. And I think, if I remember right, this kind of made me laugh. In kind of let me see if I can find it quick. Where was it? There it is. Kind of like the preview before you click on the article. The subtitle is, "If you're looking for mushy spots on the Vikings roster, these are those."
I can hear Dustin saying that. If you're looking for, I can hear him use those words. But yeah, that makes sense. So he's looking at the weakest spots where the Vikings could use a lot of help. And this kind of ties in a little bit with the article we talked about last week, where it was free agents the Vikings could sign to patch up some weak spots. So this one is really just looking at what are the weak spots. He identifies 3. What's the first one he talks about? Also, they're in order of least weak to most weak, I think, is what he says. So what's the first one he lists out?
So the first one he lists out is the wide receiver group, actually, which might seem surprising because we have arguably the best wide receiver in the league, Justin Jefferson.
I don't think it's an argument.
It's
I
not.
think he is the best. And then you had a guy with an amazing rookie year that gets overshadowed because his name's not Justin Jefferson. Addison had 900-plus yards as a rookie and a handful of touchdowns, and half of that season was without a Pro Bowl-level quarterback.
And without JJ.
Yeah, I mean, he was the wide receiver 1 for a while.
He carried the load for a while JJ was out too. So you've got a great 1 and 2 in the wide receiver room. That number 3 position, I think, is a really mushy spot on the roster, to borrow the term from Dustin. And we talked about it a little bit last week, like, well, maybe Hunter Renfrow could be a good free agent signing. You know, he's still available. You've got Michael Thomas listed here.
Yeah.
He's got to be getting old, right?
Yeah, I think Michael Thomas is almost to the point that it would be by name alone if he gets signed anywhere else. But Renfrow and Thomas are guys that Dustin specifically names in this article. Please go read that article. It's a really good one.
He's not that old, actually. He's only 31.
Yeah, but he's had some injury stuff, and enough injury stuff that I don't think he's the same player he was at his peak.
Probably true.
And that's Michael Thomas, of course. But either way, I think he would still be a better option than like an undrafted free agent right now. But yeah, after JJ... and after Jordan Addison, especially with TJ Hawkinson down, you don't have a ton of good receiving threats. So yeah, if they can shut down JJ and one-on-one and get good and shut down Addison, the Vikings don't have a lot of guys to throw to, which is not something you like to hear when you're talking about a journeyman quarterback coming in and trying to ultimately talk about a rookie quarterback coming in and showing that he can develop and be good with no weapons, really. Which is crazy to say no weapons when JJ is on the field. But yeah, that's a scary spot right now. I will say, I read another article from today or yesterday or recently and I'm going to butcher his name. I've never heard it spoken out loud. Will Raggetts. I've said his name on the podcast. He writes for Sports Illustrated. He had an article where he pointed out the guaranteed money given to all of the Vikings undrafted free agents, which I didn't know that the UDFA contracts, it's like the same contract given to every guy. It's just teams have some leeway on how much guarantees they can give to a guy to entice them to sign with them. So it's like a 3-year, just shy of $2 million or just shy of $3 million deal, and then teams can decide to give more or less guaranteed monies. But one of the guys this year, undrafted free agents, Jashawn Jones, who I'd never heard of, apparently the Vikings gave him $235,000 in guarantees for his rookie undrafted free agent contract. So maybe they like what they see, and maybe he could be a dark horse guy to come in and compete with Brandon Powell for that wide receiver 3 job. I don't know anything about him, even where he went to school, but if the Vikings wanted him that bad to give him that much guaranteed money.
He's a Terrapin. He's from Maryland.
Oh, okay. Hey, well, the last Maryland receiver for the Vikings to join the team post round 4 of the draft turned out pretty good until he wasn't pretty good, and that's, of course, Stephon Diggs.
Until he was a drama queen.
Yeah, but we got the miracle from him, so we'll take it.
Some quick hitting stats on Jones. He played 48 games between 2018 and 2023 for Maryland. 151 receptions, 2,040 yards, 14 touchdowns. He led Maryland with single-season career highs in receptions, receiving yards, and yards per game in 2023, and he ranked 5th in the Big Ten in each of those 3 categories.
All right.
So there you go.
So a guy to potentially keep an eye out for in OTAs and training camp, just to see, 1, if he makes a team, 2, maybe he makes an impact. The next position Dustin laid out as one of the worst, and this is worse than the wide receivers even, is interior offensive line. And I personally kind of disagree with this a little bit. So he means the starters on the inside of the line, the left guard, the center, and the right guard, which, of course, right now, left guard is Blake Brandel, center is Garrett Bradbury, and right guard is Ed Ingram. What are your thoughts on those guys right off the bat?
I like the second 2, as long as Ed Ingram doesn't step on the quarterback's feet. I think we're good. I think he's a great guy to have there. And Bradbury's just proven to be really steady. And when he's not in the game, it's noticeable.
Oh, yeah.
And I forget who filled in for him.
Austin Schlotman, who is now, I don't know where, he signed somewhere else. I think the Patriots. I'm probably wrong on that, but he's either way.
Well, all that to say, Schlotman wasn't bad. It was just noticeable that Bradbury wasn't in the game, and Kirk, when Bradbury wasn't in the game, seemed lost. Like he didn't, and there's chemistry there. So hopefully Bradbury can develop that chemistry with Darnold or McCarthy, whoever he's snapping the ball to, whoever's touching his butt on a regular basis. But right now, there's only 2 centers on the roster. You've got Bradbury and then Dan Feeney, who was added as a free agent.
Dan Feeney.
His mustache is interesting.
Dude's interesting.
I'm looking at his picture right now. Maybe we make that the thumbnail for this episode.
Well, I'll see what I can do.
Anyways,
Ed Ingram, I think after it kind of correlated with Dalton Reisner starting last season in 23, Ed Ingram really kind of started to turn it around, and you stopped blaming him for bad plays. He started to become less noticeable, which as an offensive lineman, that's a good thing. That means you're not ruining plays. So to me, Ed Ingram seemed to turn it around and start to be good. In Dustin's article, he does kind of mention how when you draft an interior offensive lineman in the 1st or 2nd round, which Ed Ingram was a 2nd rounder, those guys should be really good, because that's pretty high to draft a guy like that, especially not a center. So look for Ed Ingram to potentially take a leap, which he should, especially when you have a continuity in coaching staffs like we do for the first time in a long time. Garrett Bradbury, I was concerned for a while. You can go back and listen to earlier episodes. He had a back injury that kind of derailed 2 seasons ago for him. And I was concerned that back injury was essentially a career killer for him. And he missed a game or 2 in 23, I think, because of a back-ish injury, and I thought, man, we might never see him again. And then he only missed a game or 2, and he came back, and we never heard a negative thing about him the rest of the year. I think the knocks on Bradbury are that he's slightly smaller than your average center, so he might get pushed around a little bit, which we did see early in his career. But I think after he's gotten over these injury concerns, he doesn't get pushed around as blatantly as he used to. So I'm a Bradbury fan. I'm an Ingram fan. And then Brandell, we've only ever seen him come in relief. So we don't know too much about him.
And I think this position group becomes not mushy at all and quite solidified, actually, if they just sign Dalton Reisner.
Yeah, or
for the right price. But if they sign Dalton Reisner
or somebody
like him, but I don't know, I'm still like, I admitted this last week, I'm very much like, I'm attached to the guys, the players, and I have a hard time just watching guys go. Like, it was kind of emotional when Kirk Cousins left. Like, spent 6 good years with Kirk Cousins under center for the Vikings, and that is kind of a meaningful thing. And so to watch him, leave in free agency, and everything that's happened since then has been kind of interesting as well. But anyways, Dalton Reisner, like, man,
the line seemed to do really well once Reisner started coming in.
Yeah, and he's his locker room interviews were great. The energy he had on the sideline was great. The energy he had on the field was great. I know we got a comment earlier this week.
You kind of got ripped apart a little bit in a comment that you'd be a bad GM and it's not about sappiness. And
yeah. Well, whatever. I don't care.
That's fine. That's all good and dandy. But yeah,
there was one
I'd be
comment
excited.
though. There was a different comment that was like, he only has the leg kick and that's it, or something like that.
His only highlight was the leg kick. I mean, I think somebody pointed out he was like 41st of all guards in the NFL, which, I mean, that's as good as any starter. That's like middle pack of any starter.
Yeah.
You pointed out last week, I think, he's not as strong of a run blocker. But the line seemed to turn things around once he became a starter. And then here Ezra Cleveland goes and gets a pretty decent contract from the Jaguars. And I admittedly didn't follow Cleveland and see how he did for the Jaguars after he was traded. So I don't know. Obviously well enough to earn a multi-year, tens of $1 million contract. So good for him. But yeah, I'd like to see a Reisner signing, or a signing of somebody who at least can come in and start. Like last week we talked about Greg Van Roten. There's got to be somebody out there that can step in for a year. You're not looking for a 10-year guy at this point, and they drafted a couple of guys. I think the guys they drafted there's a center and then a tackle, so not necessarily a guard position, but maybe they're looking for those young guys to come in and earn a spot on the team somewhere. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you would agree with me in saying I'm less concerned about the interior offensive line than I am about the wide receiver 3 and beyond position.
Yeah, I would agree. I think if I were rewriting the article, which Dustin has his reasons, and we can respect those, I would maybe flip-flop the two. Yeah. I think I would put the interior offensive line as third most mushy, and then the wide receiver 3 position as the second most mushy.
I'd agree. We can call Dustin out on that next time he's on. Just a handful of weeks, I think we've got him coming up.
But I definitely agree with his number 1 most mushy position.
Absolutely.
And that's the defensive tackle position. So right now, the room consists of...
Before you say it, I didn't include every name on the list of defensive tackles, but I wrote down at least the names that probably matter at this point. Yep. So keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So the big names are Harrison Phillips, of course, who's another, I just think, wonderful acquisition from the Bills a few seasons ago. He's a Viking through and through. And I hope the guy retires in purple. That'd be fun to see.
Oh yeah.
Jerry Tillery was an off-season free agent acquisition.
Yeah, he feels like a buy low guy.
Yep.
For Kwesi Adofo-Mensah.
Yep.
Former first-round pick, has never really seemed to become what you think a first-round pick should become, but there's something there, and he's not too old, so he and Sam Darnold could be looking at similar roles this year in trying to revive some things in their careers.
And then you have Jonathan Bullard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he's kind of bounced between like the edge and the interior, has he not?
Yeah,
he's played both.
Yeah, and I think we both have a little confusion on what is a defensive tackle in the 3-4 defense, especially the way the Vikings roster has kind of transitioned from 4-3 to 3-4. So I'm not too sure. I think in the 3-4, the defensive tackle is the big dude in the middle, and you really only have one on a given play. But then you get those defensive ends who, in a 3-4, pretty much looks like an outside linebacker, but in a 4-3 is the hand in the dirt on the line.
Yeah,
defensive
and
end.
I'm just used to the Williams wall, two guys
Me
in the
too.
middle, two guys on the outside.
Mhm.
Jared Allen just flying out of nowhere,
Yep.
going after the quarterback, and that's what I'm used to. So the 3-4 has definitely been a little bit of an adjustment. And to be fair, Brian Flores doesn't even necessarily conform to. Are you breaking stuff?
I don't know. Something. I put my arm down and something sounded weird. It'd be interesting to see what that sounds like on the recording. But yeah, I'm just not going to put my arm down there anymore. And
Now
I'm sure it's fine.
I'm nervous about leaning my arm
No,
on.
we're
this thing.
good. I tested it.
All right. What I was saying though was Brian Flores. He keeps you on your toes, and like he'll throw everybody on the line. He'll bring Harrison Smith up and fill the A gap for a second, and then back them all off. And
you get Josh Metellus, who
Yeah.
literally at some points has played every position on the defense.
he's
famously.
the Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
He's been all over the place. So, I mean, I don't know. It's tough to really define. It's tough to put a true like 4-3, 3-4, because it's so variable. It changes, and I mean that's I think the beauty of a defensive coordinator like Brian Flores is you're always keeping the offense, you're always keeping the opposing quarterback on their toes, trying to figure out what they're looking at, what's going on, who's coming at me, who's not, how many guys are in the box, how many aren't. How many guys do we need to account for in blocks? How many are going to drop back in coverage? Like that's the beauty of the system. So anyways, all of that to say, Jonathan Bullard, he's kind of a wild card. He could be inside. I feel like he's played outside though.
Yeah.
And then James Lynch was a big re-sign.
Yeah, he's
Not
a recent
big.
re-signing. They had cut him and signed
Kind of
somebody
big.
else recently, and then re-signed him in the last, week or so. He's been with the team for a little while, but never a big splash guy. But maybe he comes in and does something. I'm not too sure. I think I've kind of forgotten about Jaquelin Roy, draft pick from last season. You never know what guys do after being in the building for a full year, in the system with a very highly touted defensive coordinator. Maybe he comes in and maybe he's a way different guy than he was last year. He never really got on the field last year. That's Jaquelin Roy. So maybe he carves out a nice role for himself in the defense. And then I think the Vikings media team loved to hype up seventh round pick Levi Drake Rodriguez.
Yeah, they did.
Who I've never heard of, but I've seen all the videos now, and his interviews. He looks like the happiest person in the world to be a Viking, and I freaking love that. The draft room videos, which the Vikings posted up a really cool one of all the phone calls and all the conversations, not every detail, but some draft day details for the war room, and then the phone calls, and the Levi Drake Rodriguez stuff was pretty cool because he, again, is the most excited in the world, and Kwesi seemed very excited to be able to still get that guy and not have to compete in undrafted free agency or somebody else draft him before they could. So you never know. There's some names that could do something, but I agree with Dustin here. It's probably the biggest obvious weakness at this point in the season, above the offensive line or wide receiver threes.
Agreed. And I mean, Harrison Phillips is a stalwart, I think. I think he's going to be the most consistent and probably the bona fide starter at this point, barring anything unforeseen like injury. Jerry Tillery remains to be kind of seen how he fits. And, of course, the defense as a whole, like we just finished saying, kind of is in flux, and it's going to be interesting to see with some of these new acquisitions how Flores puts them to work. And I don't know. there's a lot of interesting things that will develop, especially during training camp and those early preseason games, I think, with these positions.
Absolutely.
So.
And I kind of joked about it a little bit earlier, but I think I don't see any big changes to these positions or really the roster as a whole between now and the next few weeks. And like I said, Dustin Baker is going to be on in the next few weeks, so we should definitely bring this up to him in this specific article and see what his more longer thought out process of these decisions and why he ranked them where he did. But until then, definitely please go check out that article. It's really good. It doesn't take very long to read. And even if you disagree, you'll see what Dustin's saying and why he's ranking these positions the way he does. So yeah,
good stuff from Vikings territory. So make sure you head over there and check that out. All right. Well, good beer, good show.
Best episode yet.
Skol. Hey Vikings fans, Evan here from the Skol Hop, and we just wanted to say thank you again so much for listening to the Skol Hop, and we also wanted to take one more opportunity to let you know that this episode of the Skol Hop has been brought to you by Big Top Ventures. If you're considering taking an all-inclusive trip to either Mexico or Jamaica, reach out to our friends at Big Top Ventures at bigtopventuresllc@gmail.com. Once again, that's bigtopventuresllc@gmail.com. You can get the lowest rate possible on several all-inclusive resorts throughout the region. Big Top Ventures. Step right up to your next big adventure. And thanks again for listening to the Skol Hop. Skol.